Happened in the Halloween of 2011. My friends and I were doing South Park costumes to go trick-or-treating together. I was Stan, as it was literally just my name. Max was Kenny because he was the one who got messed with the most, and Jeff was Cartman because he was the chubbiest in the group. We were missing someone to be Kyle, but we couldn't get anyone to agree to be him because most people we knew hadn't even watched South Park. Despite that, it was shaping up to be a great night for trick-or-treating. I had been noticing that many of our neighbors had gone all out on their decorations, but I hoped that they saved money for their candy budget. Plus, we were off school the next day, so we could stay out pretty much as late as we wanted. I got into my costume and was right about to step out the door when my mom stopped me and told me to bring my little sister with me. I, of course, found this annoying as hell. I wasn't trying to babysit her while trick-or-treating with the boys. I told my mom all this, but she demanded I take her with me. I don't know why she or my dad couldn't take her trick-or-treating on her own, but they must have had plans I didn't know about. Either way, I didn't have a choice. When I arrived at the meeting with my little sister, I could visibly see that my friends were just as annoyed. We considered making her go up to houses separately from us, but I didn't want anything bad happening to her since it was pretty dark out. I realized that just like with my mom, I didn't have any choice in the matter, so we decided to just have her annoyingly tag along. After settling that, we got started trick-or-treating. A lot of the houses had really spooky decorations, which really shined on Halloween night. That made it more fun and felt like it balanced out being stuck with my sister. The candy haul was also above average, which was an extra bonus. However, we were never allowed to forget that my sister was there. Every time a door opened and we were about to say trick or treat, she would jump through the air in front of us and scream it at the top of her lungs in a really high-pitched voice. Trick or treat! Trick or treat. It felt annoying and embarrassing as hell. I felt like if the candy and decorations hadn't made up for it, my sister would have basically ruined Halloween for me and my friends. As time went on, more and more houses started turning off their porch lights. Houses that were still giving out candy were getting harder to come by. There weren't many people still out either. It was almost time to call it a night. But soon after, we saw a group of people running down the street toward us. They were screaming, but we had no idea why. They ended up running right past us without giving any reason, so we shrugged it off. We assumed it had to be someone's costume or something creepy they must have seen up the street, so we decided to check it out. At the next intersection, we looked around and saw that down the street to the right was a single house that still had their light on. It was really dim and flickered a bit. There was a lit jack-o'-lantern on the steps. They were probably still giving out candy. That's when we all started walking toward the house. When we made it to the front, I remembered hearing something weird. It sounded like a small motorcycle engine, but I didn't see any bikes on the road. Suddenly, a man wearing a Leatherface costume jumped out of the bushes right in front of us. We all screamed as he revved the chainsaw. We then sprinted away in different directions as the man came after us. I ran for my life for about 5 seconds before looking back over my shoulder. That's when I saw that my sister was running down the middle of the road toward the intersection. I started to yell at her, but before I could form the words, the unthinkable happened. I saw a car come speeding from the left side, and one moment after it came into view, it collided with my sister. She was dragged under the car and carried off. I stopped running instantly, frozen in shock. Tears were streaming down my face profusely, and the world was fading away from me. Max eventually came up and snapped me out of it, and that's when I broke down completely. The man who scared us was the one who called 911. The cops came and arrested the driver of the car, and my sister was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Unfortunately, that's the last time I saw her. She didn't make it. The driver claims he wasn't at fault and claims my sister ran into his vehicle without signaling or anything. However, the man who scared us, on the other hand, is being sued into the ground by my parents. He keeps saying that he was only trying to have fun by scaring trick-or-treaters for Halloween and talking about how he's remorseful, but remorse won't bring my sister back to life. I still haven't felt the same since it happened. I keep replaying the moment in my head, thinking about what I could have done differently. It was such a freak accident that if any one thing were changed about the circumstances, my sister would still be alive. Sadly, nothing can be done to change the past. I only wish I had been nicer to my sister on the last night of her life. The story was inspired by a horrific Halloween incident that took place in 2011. It's always been known that some people take their Halloween spirit a bit too far. We all know the ones. The ones where you never know if the guy in a rocking chair is real or a decoration. A man named Frank Alba took this to a whole new level when he decided to dress up in a bloody apron with a real chainsaw and hide in the bushes on the Halloween of 2011. He knew he was in the direct path of trick-or-treaters coming home from trick-or-treating. And sure enough, a group soon walked by. Alba then jumped out of the bushes and revved the chainsaw, sending the trick-or-treaters screaming. Unfortunately, one of the trick-or-treaters named Leslie Garcia ran into a busy road and was hit by a car. The family has since sued as the girl sustained permanent injuries and trauma, but the results of the lawsuit are unclear.
Happened years ago, but it still gives me the creeps every time I think about it. I was a single father at the time, living with my teenage son in my small 2-bedroom house. When he was younger, he used to wake me up in the middle of the night after a nightmare and make me search his room for monsters and that sort of thing. But that stopped for a long time. Then, one night, my son woke me up saying he saw a really scary man in his bedroom. I was alarmed because he was really freaked out, more afraid than I'd ever seen him. However, when I walked him back to his bedroom and searched it, I found nobody. I assured my son that he just had a nightmare or maybe a night terror, but he tried very hard to convince me that it was real. After I got annoyed and told him to go back to bed, I went back to sleep as well. This exact thing happened again the next 2 nights, and every time, my son swore he saw a smiling man in his bedroom. I looked for the man and found nothing. I started to get irritated with him because I was losing sleep over it, but I couldn't blame him for something out of his control. I considered getting him seen by a sleep specialist to sort it out, but I never got around to it because of what happened on the 4th night. By then, I had lost so much sleep that I didn't even make it to bed. I fell asleep on the couch while watching TV. I expected to be woken up by my son again, but that's not exactly what happened. Instead, I woke up to a pungent odor filling the house. It was a really strong chemical smell that was weirdly sweet. I had no idea what it was or where it was coming from, but I knew it wasn't something that should be there. I got up from the couch and started walking to my son's room, having some kind of parental intuition that the smell was coming from there. As I approached his door, the odor was almost overpowering. I slowly opened the door and saw something I'll never forget. A creep was hovering over my son. When he saw me, he looked at me with the most terrifying smile I've ever seen. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What are you doing to my son?
Shh, you're gonna wake the baby. I just got him to sleep.
I ran towards him and shoved him towards the window, away from my son, but he charged back at me and threw me out of the way, then ran out of the room. I chased after him, catching up to him as he was opening the front door. I tackled him to the ground just outside the house and pinned him down with my knee crammed into the back of his neck. Luckily, I had my phone in my pocket and managed to pull it out and dial 911 while restraining the freak. Even with his face buried in the concrete, he still managed to turn his head around and smile at me the whole time. It took the police several minutes to arrive, but the freak never gave up on trying to get away. I had to throw my phone to the side and use both my hands to hold his arms back, and I couldn't let up with my knee for a second, or I knew he'd squirm out. When the police finally got there and tried to arrest him, he almost escaped as I handed him off to them, but both officers were able to keep him on the ground and put him in handcuffs, then drag him into the back of the car. All the while, the sicko smiled like he was having the time of his life being a sick monster. After he was taken away, the house was searched. My son was awake, but completely incoherent, so he was taken to the hospital. In my son's closet, they found binoculars, rubber gloves, sedatives, and the toxic chemicals I was smelling that woke me up. The freak had soaked a rag in the chemicals and had been holding it down over my son's face while he slept, trying to make him completely unconscious for God knows what reason. Thankfully, my son turned out to be okay. He says he had no memory of what happened that night, but when the police showed him the man's mugshot, he confirmed it was the same man that he had been seeing the previous 3 nights. My heart dropped even lower than it already was. The whole time I thought my son was having nightmares and seeing things. He was actually right. There was a demented smiling creep coming in from the window of his bedroom, then watching him for 3 nights in a row. but every time I went to look for the man, he managed to hide or escape. I apologized for not believing him. He didn't hold it against me, but I still feel terrible for it. The man was charged and convicted of various crimes and is spending decades in jail, but it isn't enough for me to not feel traumatized by the psychotic smile on his face. Every time I think about it, I feel sick. That man was in my son's room for 4 nights, watching him, planning out some sick and twisted act. He never admitted to anything, so I'll never know. I'm just glad he never got the chance to carry out whatever he was planning. This story was inspired by a disturbing Washington Examiner news article regarding a Dundalk father who repeatedly kept smelling something odd in his daughter and son's bedroom at night. That's when the dad entered the bedroom on Monday at 2:30 a.m. and found a strange man trying to hide in a wardrobe. The suspect was 49-year-old Richard Marks, who then ran out of the house, but the father chased him and held him until police arrived. According to Baltimore County Police, Marks tried to fight them off when they arrived, but he was ultimately subdued. After the incident, police described the boy as lethargic and confused. Parents found 2 rags with a strong chemical smell in the bedroom, which happened to be the same chemical odor found in the children's hair, police said. Detectives also said a man had been seen by one of the children 2 days earlier in the backyard, but he fled. After searching more in the home, police found binoculars, rubber gloves, adult literature, and various chemicals. Marks is currently in custody, facing several charges. This happened a few years ago, back when I used to live in a small apartment in the quieter part of the city. Of course, I didn't like living alone. I only really had one problem in my life. It started happening right at the beginning of fall one year. I had these nightmares almost every night. It was like sleep paralysis. I kept seeing someone in my room, standing over me. If I had to describe it, it was something like a dark silhouette. It was terrifying. The figure in my room inched closer to me every night, and in each subsequent nightmare, the tightness in my chest gripped me harder, slowly paralyzing me until I could barely even breathe, let alone move to run or defend myself. Initially, I considered it to be a consequence of living alone for as long as I had. I figured it must have just been me being paranoid. However, after it went on like that for weeks, I started to get genuinely concerned. One morning, after a particularly terrifying nightmare, I decided it was time to see a therapist about it. The chronic fear was weighing on me mentally and physically. It had to stop. However, later that night, I was ridden with the same anxiety I had become used to before bed. I remember tossing and turning countlessly, trying to settle on a comfortable position that may allow me to sleep soundly.
Stop. I told you, I'm 30. You don't need to wipe me anymore. What's making that noise? Maybe it's just the old building. What the hell? Oh God, it's him. I can see him. Stay away. I know you're not real. I've seen you 100 times before, and I know you can't hurt me. You're not real. This has to be a nightmare. I'm gonna wake up any second now. No. Why can't I move? Why? Get the hell away from me! Somebody help me! Go back to hell or I'm calling the cops! Get off me! Help! Somebody help me!
I barely managed to escape. as the crazed freak chased me down my own house. Whoever this was definitely an intruder. I didn't know who this psycho was, but all I knew was that the freak was trying to slash me with whatever he was armed with. I managed to run out of my apartment building with minor cuts, sprinting down the street and screaming wildly for help. I got up to a random house and started banging on the door until they answered. I begged them to call 911. They seemed freaked out by me at first, but were willing to help me out. When the police arrived, the man who attacked me was long gone. I was taken to the hospital and treated, but I turned out fine physically. The problem is that I still haven't recovered mentally. All that chronic stress and fear in the beginning, all leading up to that godforsaken night. The dreams must have been premonitions. It's the only way I can explain how the man who attacked me matched up so well with the silhouette I kept seeing in my nightmares. The only other explanation was that he had been breaking into my room every single night for a month, but never got caught or attacked me until that random night. I was worried he would never be caught, but several days after the attack, the police found the man, but it was from a different incident. He had gone on a huge killing spree, taking out multiple people in their homes in the same fashion he was trying to do to me. The suspect in question, a 26-year-old man named Daniel Gonzalez, who had apparently been messed up his whole life and had recently been obsessed with horror movies so much that he wanted to recreate the killings in real life. I've been deeply traumatized by the attack. I had to move out of my apartment and live with my parents because I couldn't go back to where it happened. I'm still dealing with the intense paranoia and crippling insomnia years later. Every day, I'm scared he will show up to get the job done, and every night, I'm terrified that he might show up in my sleep again, or maybe in my nightmares. This story was inspired by a man named Daniel Gonzalez, who had become notorious for being known as the Freddy Krueger Killer. In September 2004, he had embarked upon a violent rampage across London and Sussex. Inspired by horror films such as A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, the 24-year-old loner took out 4 people over 2 days using a knife. Gonzalez would randomly select houses in North London to disturb his victims, and also attempted to take out another 2 men but was fought off and managed to escape. He was eventually caught while trying to board the London Underground, which was a maximum security hospital. Jurors decided that he was a drug-crazed, cold-blooded murderer and not suffering from mental illness as he claimed. Gonzalez was eventually jailed for life in 2006 and was found deceased the following year.
Happened several years ago, in my sophomore year of college. I was sort of friends with this guy named Arthur. We just happened to be in the same engineering major, and we had very similar class schedules, with a lot of night classes, and even lived in the same apartment building next to the campus. I ran into him all the time, so it was inevitable that we would at least know each other. To be honest, the guy was a bit of a nut job. He was a very strange and introverted person. He didn't seem like the type to ever have any friends. I didn't want to be rude and ghost the guy because he was an incel, so he very quickly latched onto me and stayed in contact since. But there was something else about him that made me embarrassed to be seen with him. Arthur was extremely obsessed with the Joker. He wanted to be the Batman villain so bad that it was genuinely concerning. He would laugh like the Joker all the time, no matter what the reason was for laughing, and sometimes for no reason at all. He liked to dress like the Joker too, and even grew out his hair and dyed it green. The only thing he didn't do was put the makeup on his face. Even without that, he was known around campus as the Joker Kid, and I was known as the one who always tagged along with him. Since our routines were so similar, we walked to class and studied together most days, which made us see each other more often than I would have liked. One evening, I invited him over to my apartment to study for an upcoming exam. Our classes were so difficult that we often studied late into the night, so I offered up my couch for him to crash on if he wanted. On this one night, I was sitting on my bed while Arthur took the desk. As we studied for a few hours, I noticed that Arthur was acting a little stranger than usual.
He kept staring at me through the pages of his notes while giggling under his breath. At one point, he got up from the desk and sat next to me on my bed. Nothing happened for a long, awkward moment. He just sat there smiling at me, not saying anything. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Arthur leaned forward and tried to kiss me. I rocked backwards and shoved him off the bed. Then I kicked him out of my apartment.
Get the hell out of here!
No, please, it was just a joke. Just take your stuff and go home now. I couldn't help but look through the peephole and watch Arthur walk down the hallway for as long as I could see him. He was prancing around and laughing like the Joker the whole time. Even when he was out of sight, I could still hear it. The incident was weird as hell. I knew it was only a matter of time before I saw Arthur do some crazy shit, and I would have to suffer the consequences. For the rest of the night, I tried studying, but it was almost impossible to focus, so I went to bed early and tried to get some sleep for the exam the next day. I didn't leave my apartment until the last minute. When I situated myself in the classroom, I noticed that Arthur was late, but just before the exam started, I found out what had taken him so long. Arthur showed up to the classroom with a carved smile on his face. He had cuts on both sides of his mouth. He came and sat right next to me, staring and smiling, forcing me to ask what happened to his face, but he didn't answer. He just laughed. A moment later, the exam started, but the entire time, I could see that weirdo staring at me, completely ruining my concentration. As soon as I finished, I bolted to my locker and grabbed all my stuff, hoping to get to the building before Arthur did. But unfortunately, he was waiting for me right outside the campus. He had managed to smear on the Joker's face paint while I was inside. I walked by without acknowledging him, but he caught up quickly. We walked together in silence. My awkwardness and anxiety fueled me even further. All I wanted to do was get to my apartment, and as far away from the psycho as possible. Unfortunately, the only way to walk to the apartment building without taking a huge detour was to walk through a large wooded park. It was dimly lit, and few people ventured into it at night. I didn't even think of the implications of going in there, but as soon as we were out of view from the street, things took a turn. Arthur suddenly pulled out a knife and slashed me across the chest. I jumped back and sprinted away as fast as I could. Arthur chased me the entire way home, but I managed to rush inside my apartment and lock the door just before he barged in after me. I took a moment to catch my breath before I left outside. I expected to see Arthur smiling, but he wasn't there at all. I immediately called the police, and they later came to arrest him. They found him sitting at the bottom of my door, just out of view from my peephole. If I had opened the door thinking he was gone, he would have killed me. When Arthur was questioned about why he attacked me, he said he wasn't inspired, but motivated by the Joker from The Dark Knight. I used to love that movie, but ever since then, I've never been able to watch it. Arthur caused me to fail that semester, and left physical and mental scars that are still with me to this day. This story was inspired by a disturbing incident regarding a British female who was accused of attempting to take out another female after being quote-unquote motivated by Batman's arch-nemesis, the Joker. The alleged suspect showed up at school on April 25th with both sides of her mouth cut, mirroring the smiling scars of the Joker, as portrayed by actor Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight. The female then lured a former school chum to a vacant area of the school, giggling as they walked, and then attacked her with a sharp object. Luckily, the victim only suffered a minor puncture wound to her chest. The defendant, who denies the allegations, had previously spoken about turning her face to look like Ledger's character, having a scar on both sides of her mouth to portray the Joker's smile. The female also mentioned that the Joker didn't inspire her, but motivated her. She then allegedly sent a follow-up message saying, "If the plan does fail, I will say the voices in my head made me do it." Earlier in the day, the girl told a witness that she was going to commit the act, but her pal didn't believe her. Prosecutors told the court that the girl was a fan of serial killers and mass-inflicted crime.
I cared for my father in his old age for as long as I could. Unfortunately, he only got worse and worse over the years. He had started showing signs of dementia ever since my mom passed. When his condition became more severe, I could no longer give him the care that he needed. I didn't want to trust others to look after him or risk making him feel abandoned. but I had no other choice than to put him in a nursing home with the proper facilities to care for patients with dementia. My father was assigned several nurses to look after him when I wasn't around, but I still tried to visit him as much as I could, so I ended up meeting all of his nurses. All of them were nice to him and felt trustworthy, except for one. Her name was Daniela. She creeped me out to no end. She was always smiling, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. I always got the feeling that she wasn't smiling about something good. After a while, I became convinced that she had to be evil in some way, and that's why she was smiling. It was like she was a demon watching people get tortured. I tried to ignore it, but I knew deep down she worked in a nursing home because on some level, she enjoyed watching people waste away and die. Even the way she talked made it seem like she was possessed. While all the other nurses spoke to the patients with compassion and understanding, Daniela spoke with this cold, taunting tone. I had to wonder if it was all a game to her, if she might actually be working against the patients to see if she could shorten their lives. It always felt sketchy leaving my father in Daniela's care. It certainly didn't help that if she ever entered the room while he was awake, he would start wailing and screaming, but he didn't have enough strength to keep her away. I knew that his dementia had progressed a lot, so I knew that there didn't have to be any logical reason for him to be afraid of her. He was afraid of me sometimes, but that didn't help me feel any less like there was something going on with Daniela, something that my dad, even in his mental state, could pick up on. One night, after I had been with him for a large portion of the day, I had to go home and leave him with Daniela. I was particularly suspicious of her that night. She had been trying to get me to go home as soon as she started her shift, which only made me want to stay as long as I could. When I eventually left, I had a sick feeling in my stomach. Everything in me wanted to stay, but I knew I had to work the next day, and I couldn't sleep there. However, I couldn't sleep at my house either. Every time I closed my eyes, they just seemed to pop right back open.
What are you doing here?
I'm gonna take care of you. Don't worry.
No! Back off! Don't come near me!
Don't you recognize me? I'm not gonna hurt you.
Stay away! Stay away!
Time for you to take a nice, long nap!
No! No! No!
I woke up flailing out of control. I was alone in my room, no sign of Nurse Daniela. It was just a nightmare, but a vivid and terrifying one. I was drenched in sweat, and my heart was pounding. I decided to get up and change, then head back to check on my dad. I had a feeling something was wrong. I just knew it. When I got to the nursing home, all the hallways were dimmer than usual. I had never been there that late, so I didn't know if that was typical or not. I found my way to my dad's room, and when I got there, my worst fear was smiling at me. Daniela was standing over my dad, smiling like the freak she is. The heart monitor was wailing. His heart had stopped. My dad was gone, and Daniela was smiling about it. I broke down in tears as other staff members came to his aid, but there was nothing they could do. But something in me knew Daniela had done something to him, so I alerted the authorities. They later found her in possession of the compound used in lethal injections for executions. A medical examiner confirmed that it was present in my dad's blood. Daniela was arrested and charged. During the investigation, it was found out that she had taken out dozens of patients in the nursing home and took out whatever patient she found them or their families annoying, just so she didn't have to deal with them anymore. I'll never forget that smile on her face as she stood over my dad that night. The pure evil and the satisfaction of her face from taking someone out still haunts me. All I can say is, that evil woman is severely ill and needs help. This story was inspired by a disturbing incident regarding a nurse, whose photos have emerged showing her smiling next to numerous patients who were allegedly deceased. Italian nurse Daniela Poggiali is suspected of taking out up to 38 patients because she found them or their relatives annoying, police have said. The photos were shot by Poggiali's co-worker, Sarah Pausini, who told local media she was intimidated into taking the pictures. Sarah made a testimony saying, "Poggiali asked me to go to the closet with her where they brought the deceased patients. She was particularly euphoric and wanted to take a picture next to them. I didn't have the courage to say no because she is a vindictive type. I was in fear and awe of Pogyali and didn't want any trouble. She used to give laxatives to patients just to embarrass colleagues on the next shift, so I did what she wanted. Pogyali has since been charged.
I was driving home after a 12-hour shift when I passed by the Wendy's near my house and noticed new posters put up next to the road. They were advertising a Krabby Patty. I was genuinely intrigued. It seemed like the sort of thing that should have happened a dozen times by now, given that the Krabby Patty has been such an iconic burger over the years. But it was the first time I'd ever seen it made in real life. However, it was easy to see that the Krabby Patty was immensely popular, as the line for the drive-thru was completely full. The inside looked packed as hell too. I decided I didn't want to wait in line forever with the masses, and come back later when things died down a little bit. To get into the spirit of things, I watched SpongeBob for a couple hours to kill some time. SpongeBob was a big part of my childhood, so I was really excited to see if the Krabby Patty lived up to the hype. I eventually got dressed and started walking toward the Wendy's, which was only about 10 minutes away by foot. When I got there, it seemed pretty dead. There wasn't a single car in line, and it didn't look like there was anyone inside. I was worried it had closed as it was getting late, but I walked up to the building just to be sure. Before I got to the door, I walked past a guy who had a box truck backed up to the kitchen door and was unloading crates of boxes. He noticed me walking into the restaurant and smiled creepily. At first, I thought he was just being polite, but after a second, I realized that smile didn't sit right with me. It was off-putting for some reason, but I couldn't tell why. I ended up brushing him off and headed inside. The place was definitely empty except for myself and the cashier. I then walked up to the register. Behind it was perhaps the weirdest looking person I've ever seen. It was an old woman, maybe close to 70, or at least that's how she looked. And when she smiled, her teeth were appalling. They were all dead and rotten. I considered leaving just because of her, and while I wish now that I had at the time, I didn't want to be rude. I approached the counter and placed my order for a Krabby Patty. She punched in my order and told me to take a seat. Supposedly, my food would be ready in a few minutes, but I doubted that there was anybody left in the kitchen at all. The idea of that woman going back to make it herself tremendously lowered my expectations for what I was about to eat. And the fact that I was the only customer in there gave me a weird feeling about the whole thing. I sat there in silence, looking out the window at the advertisement which had drawn me into the situation in the first place. I wished I had stayed home.
Here's your Krabby Patty.
Thanks. It smells great. Thank you.
Go on, try it.
Actually, I'd like some privacy, please.
Well, you see, we've had some complaints throughout the day about our new Krabby Patty, so I'd like to see if I made it correctly.
That's okay. I'll just come back to the counter and tell you what I thought when I'm finished. I don't want to be watched while I
Eat the damn Krabby Patty!
I didn't know what else to do. The woman had screamed in my face and I was alone with her. I could have fought her off, but she was just an old lady. I decided my privacy wasn't worth it, so I unwrapped the Krabby Patty and took a bite. I immediately noticed something off about the taste. I hoped it would turn into something better, but the more I chewed it, the more disgusting it became. When I tried to swallow it, I gagged it right back up and spit it onto the wrapper. That angered the woman so much that she grabbed the piece I spit out and smeared it all over my mouth. I shoved the woman so hard she fell to the ground, but instead of shouting in pain, she started laughing. I ran out of the restaurant, leaving her and the Krabby Patty behind. Outside, I ran into the same creepy guy loading boxes into the kitchen. He saw the look on my face, which made him smile even wider than the first time. I ignored him and ran home. Once inside, I locked the door and tried to get my head straight. What just happened? Should I call the police? What kind of crime would that even count as? I don't have a clue, so I felt like I should just leave it alone like a bad dream. I was still hungry and needed to get that horrible taste out of my mouth, so I had Uber Eats delivered to my door. A few days later, I had nearly forgotten all about the Krabby Patty incident. I was attending a funeral in town for an old relative, sitting in the local cemetery with all my family members, when I saw a face that shouldn't have been there. It was the same man with the truck, the one unloading boxes and transferring them into the Wendy's. He was dressed in a different work uniform than the last time I saw him. Finally, I put two and two together and realized he was a groundskeeper for the cemetery. I've been sick ever since. I know there's something in those Krabby Patties that the public doesn't know about. That secret formula is not what it seems. In my freshman year of college, I didn't go out to many parties or anything like that. I mostly just stayed in my dorm. At the time, I was really interested in Batman content. I followed a lot of Facebook and Instagram pages of cosplayers and fan edits of Batman, so much so that those kind of posts made up half of everything the algorithm threw at me. But there was this one guy in the fandom that stood out to me. It was this page on Facebook of some Joker cosplayer. This guy looked about 50 years old, much older than most cosplayers, and in a way, he was actually really good at playing the character.
Why so serious?
He live-streamed himself on Facebook here and there, always dressed as Heath Ledger's Joker. Sometimes he would even live-stream himself getting into costume like in the movie. He was very talkative to his viewers too, like he was actually the Joker and they were his henchmen. There was rarely a dull moment as he was always doing weird shit on camera. Occasionally, the entire stream would just be him staring into the camera and laughing like a crazy person for hours, and nothing else. I decided to follow him. I found it a bit weird and creepy, but also an interesting interpretation of a character I was a big fan of. There was no schedule to when he would stream. I would just randomly get a notification that he was live. I always checked it out to see what he was up to if I could, but I never stayed for long. About a month after I started following him, it was October, and my classes were ramping up the workload. One night, after spending the entire afternoon and most of the evening studying, I turned off all the lights and crashed into bed, ready to get some sleep. About a minute after lying down, my phone buzzed. I reached over for my phone to check the notification out of habit. It turned out to be a notification from Facebook. It was that guy, the Joker, going live once again. I really didn't want to watch a stream this late at night, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I joined it. Right away, I noticed something different. Normally he only live streamed from home, but this time, he was dressed up walking down the street. What he was saying wasn't normal either.
Looks like we got another one. Come on, people. Tell your friends to join. Because if we get 1,000 viewers, I'm gonna start killing lots of people.
Once I realized that he might be serious, I left the stream. I didn't want to contribute to the viewer count if something went wrong. I put my phone away and tried to go back to sleep. But despite being exhausted, I was wide awake. I couldn't stop thinking about the stream. I was so curious. There was nothing distracting me from convincing myself that it would be fine to look at it again. I'd never seen any of his streams get past 100 viewers, let alone 1,000. He didn't even have 1,000 people following his page. There was no way he could get to 1,000. I finally decided after 20 minutes that I wanted to be a part of it, so I decided to rejoin. That's when I saw the guy now standing outside some kind of restaurant, but then I looked at the viewer count. He was only a few people away from hitting 1,000. Just as I noticed, that number changed to 1K. Oh shit. A second later, the Joker started screaming and laughing in celebration.
1,000 viewers!
I'm nothing if not a man of my word. So, let's get to killing, shall we? Before I knew it, he pulled out a knife and entered the restaurant, flipping the camera over to show him entering. Everyone had stopped what they were doing and looked at him. It was like they were all frozen, with the same confused and freaked out looks on all their faces. I wanted to turn away, to put my phone down and act like it wasn't happening, but I couldn't. I was just as frozen as them. Suddenly, he turned the camera back to his face, lifted up the knife, then charged at the people. There was a second where his laughter and the screams of the people in the restaurant were mixed together, and then it froze. The stream was stuck on his face, smiling wide right next to a knife. Immediately, the chat was overflowing with messages from the viewers. Most of them were extremely concerned, but I saw a few of them cheering him on. A war erupted in the comments as everyone eagerly waited for the video to come back, but it didn't. I was dying of curiosity, but there was no way for me to find out what happened. I eventually turned off my phone and tried to forget about it so I could sleep. Weeks went by, and I still didn't know what had happened. The guy stopped posting and streaming altogether. Then, one day, I saw on the news that the exact same guy dressed as the Joker had been arrested for making terroristic threats and attacking people in a restaurant weeks earlier. Luckily, nobody was hurt. Bystanders managed to tackle him quickly and restrained him until police arrived. I don't condone or agree with what he did, but I still follow his page to this day, wondering if he'll ever go live again. This story was inspired by a disturbing incident regarding a man who dressed as the Joker and live-streamed himself threatening to take people out. He had been arrested for making terroristic threats at a restaurant in St. Louis, Missouri. Jeremy Joseph Garner, 51, donned a full face of clown makeup in the style of the Batman villain, the Joker. He then drove to the Blueberry Hill Bar and Restaurant around 8:15 p.m., claiming his aim was to draw attention to the opioid epidemic. Garner said in the nearly hour-long Facebook Live video, "I'm going to start taking out people until this reaches 1,000 viewers. And once it reaches 1,000, I'm going to go out in public and I'm going to take out more." In the video, Garner orders a soda and tells the barman, "I don't drink alcohol. Yeah, I can't be inebriated when I'm planning on, killing a bunch of people. It's not something you can do. I'm live on Facebook right now. I've got like nearly 2,000 people watching me." The University City Police Department responded after they received a report of a disturbance involving a male subject dressed in a costume. When cops approached him, the man said, "I'm not armed and I weigh 150 pounds. I don't have no weapons on me. I'm not going to do nothing. You've got me messed up, except all these bombs." After officers searched the area, the suspect was taken into custody. The charging document doesn't indicate whether he was in possession of any explosives or was otherwise armed. The man was since charged for his terroristic threats. A GoFundMe page was created for Garner that claims he was someone who was reported mistakenly. He claims he was just chasing clout and bringing attention to the opiate crisis plaguing this country.
I was alone on Halloween this year. My wife was on a 3-day-long business trip, leaving the house and all the trick-or-treaters to me. I bought 2 bags of candy since my neighborhood gets a lot of foot traffic on Halloween. I made it home from work around 6 p.m., with just enough time to settle in and get ready for the trick-or-treaters. As usual, it started off at dusk with a bunch of kids and their parents.
Trick or treat.
Eventually, around 10:30, there were barely any kids left on the street since it was a school night. Once I passed out my last piece of candy, I turned off my porch light and locked the door. Then I went to bed upstairs. About half an hour later, I heard a knock. I rolled my eyes and ignored it, figuring it was someone messing around or someone too stupid to realize what the unlit porch light means. After a few seconds, they knocked again, even louder. Now I was mad. I had just been on the verge of falling asleep, just to be woken up by some stupid kid. Suddenly, an insane loud bang rang through the house. I knew whoever was at my front door was either in dire need of something or just some prick with nothing better to do. I was weirded the hell out seeing as it was late as hell. I then made my way downstairs and checked through the peephole. All I remember seeing was that it was pitch black outside, but I could see a person that looked like a woman. She was wearing what must have been the creepiest mask I had ever seen, but the rest of her clothes were plain. I wondered if she was even in a costume, but the bag in her hand made it seem like she was a trick-or-treater, despite clearly being a fully grown woman. She gave me a weird feeling, but I didn't feel very threatened by a single woman, so I decided to talk to her.
Is Tamara home?
No, I think you have the wrong house.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
Trick or treat?
Hey, I don't have any candy left. You're too late. Look, I don't know what you're doing out here on your own, but I think you're a little too old to be trick-or-treating. You should go home.
She just turned the other way and walked off into the darkness. I shut the door and locked it before any other creepy thing could happen. As I went back upstairs, I shrugged the interaction off as a college student going around and trying to freak people out on Halloween. I wouldn't have given her the credit personally, but if that were the case, it worked on me. I wanted to sleep it off, but as soon as I got into bed, I heard someone knocking on the door again. I shouted at them from upstairs to go away, but they only banged on the door even louder. I marched downstairs in a rage, expecting to open the door and see the same woman, ready to chew her out for making me lose some sleep. But I opened the door to something much worse. There were 2 more people standing outside with her, wearing the similar unsettling masks. I instantly knew I'd made a mistake. If I had checked the peephole again, I never would have opened the door to these strangers. Something about them was terrifying. They lifted up the 3 empty bags and asked in unison,
Trick or treat!
I don't have any candy, you freaks! Get the hell away from me!
Suddenly, the man in the middle rushed forward and grabbed me by the neck, trying to force his way through the door.
Someone help!
I held my ground and kept a tight grip on the door, but the 2 other women also crammed themselves into the doorway and pushed against me. I summoned all the fight I had and kicked the woman as hard as I could, shoving her back into the other woman behind her. She tripped and fell backwards with her, leaving me in a one-on-one with the man strangling me. I planted my foot behind me and threw him out onto the porch on top of the other 2. Then I slammed the door and locked it as fast as I could. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife that I had. Then I called the police. 15 minutes felt like 15 hours as I was hiding in the kitchen, expecting the people in the masks to break down the door at any moment. When the police finally arrived, the strangers were long gone. I filed a police report, but because they were wearing masks and completely covered their skin with clothing, my description was basically useless. The only evidence I really had was a surveillance video that was taken from my front door camera. Despite handing it to the police, they were still unable to find them. I can't stop thinking about it ever since. I installed a chain lock for my door and got a security system with an alarm and a better camera pointed at my porch. Despite that, it's been difficult to sleep. Even though my wife says that they would be stupid to come back, I still can't relax knowing they're still out there. They could return anywhere at any time, and I'll never have any warning. This story was inspired by a disturbing Halloween incident where 3 people who dressed as trick-or-treaters were carrying out home invasions and armed robbery. The NYPD says it happened just after 10:30 p.m. on Halloween in the Sheepshed Bay section of Brooklyn. Police say that a male and female wearing costumes and carrying trick-or-treat bags knocked on a 37-year-old man's door and said, "Trick or treat." The man opened the door and gave them candy, but the male pulled out a firearm and tried to force his way into the home. The female walked down the stairs and out of the fenced-in yard. As the victim struggled to keep the masked man out, a second male ran up to the door and also tried to push his way past the victim. They allegedly hit the victim in the face repeatedly during the incident. After a brief period of time, the victim managed to push both of them out of his home and lock the door. The males then took off on foot. The NYPD released a security camera recording of the incident in hopes that someone could identify the robbers. There was no information on injuries to the homeowner. This happened years ago when I was a teen. I lived in a small house with my mother and stepdad. I never knew my real dad, but my stepdad was always there to help us out and seemed to get along well with my mom. We weren't wealthy, but my stepdad had a few prized possessions, one of which was his collection of all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies on VHS. We watched one of those movies just about every other night. I remember hating every single one of them. I was way too young to be watching scary movies like that. There wasn't much to do in my own room, and my stepdad would get offended if I showed that I wasn't interested in watching his movies with him. So I was basically forced to watch it in the living room with him and my mom. I must have seen each one at least a dozen times. I don't know how my parents could still be entertained by them, but they clearly enjoyed it every single time. Watching those movies constantly gave me terrible nightmares. I would spend countless nights tossing and turning, struggling to get to sleep because I was so afraid of my dreams. They were always the same. I would feel like I was in the movies, literally having a nightmare on Elm Street, running for my life in the darkness being chased by Freddy Krueger. That wasn't even the worst of it either. Sometimes, about once a week, I would wake up from a nightmare and see Freddy Krueger standing in the corner of my room. I would always stare him down and rub my eyes, hoping he would go away, but he always remained. He would stand there, motionless, watching me sleep with a smile on his face. I usually just pretended it wasn't real and pulled the covers over my face so I wouldn't see him anymore. I was always scared that he would cut through the sheets and attack me, but I told myself every night that if I saw him that he was just in my imagination. It had to be the movie's fault. It couldn't actually be Freddy Krueger. I had to think so if I wanted to sleep at all. One day, after getting almost no sleep, I told myself that I wouldn't allow my silly imagination to get the best of me. Oddly enough, I didn't see him again for over 2 weeks. Of course, it was only a matter of time. One night, I woke up from a nightmare at 3 a.m. Freddy was in the same corner as always. I locked eyes with him, terrified, but trying desperately to work up the courage to confront him. This time, however, something was different. Freddy moved. He raised up his clawed hand and started waving it at me, taunting me with it. He then started clawing at the wall. Something was extremely wrong. He had never moved before. I sat there in my bed scared shitless. Now, I was just in the same situation I was every time I saw Freddy, petrified and helpless. It didn't seem like hiding under the sheets was a smart move. I was convinced Freddy was actually going to do something to me this night. All I could think to do was to see if he could talk to me.
Freddy? Is that you?
In an instant, Freddy was right on top of me. He laughed as he tried to pull the covers off the bed, cutting holes straight through them. He held me down with one hand and tormented me with the blades of his glove. I was sure it was the end, but I wasn't going down easy. I kicked and screamed and did everything I could to fight back.
No! Stop it! Stop it! Mom! Help me!
Freddy laughed so hard for so long that he must have run himself out of breath. I ran to my parents' room and barged in, frantically shaking my mom to wake her up. I told her what was happening, so she told me to stay put in her room while she called the cops. She then left the room. I could hear her shouting at the phone or whatever. Everything after that was kind of a blur, because the cops ended up showing up, but they never caught any Freddy Krueger. As the years have gone past and I've gotten wiser, I figured out what really happened. After that night, I never saw Freddy Krueger in my room, but more importantly, I never saw my stepdad again either. My mom never wanted to talk about it, and she even destroyed all my stepdad's VHS tapes. Nobody ever told me explicitly, but I eventually put it together that it must have just been my stepdad who was watching me sleep at night as Freddy Krueger. To dress up as Freddy Krueger and routinely terrorize me was just insane to me. For it to escalate to the point of him actually trying to attack me just scares the hell out of me. I see why my mom cut him out of our life, but I'm curious to see if he was charged or convicted of anything. I was traumatized by the entire ordeal, so I want to know more about what was behind it to help me heal, but it's still not something I think my mom is ready to talk about. This story was inspired by a creepy incident regarding a 47-year-old man named David Lamb, who would climb into the loft above children's bedrooms and scratch on the ceiling pretending he was Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street films. During a string of sick pranks, he hung 2 of the victims from a door frame so they could barely breathe and got his pet lizards to bite them. He bundled one victim into his car boot and drove around, and on another occasion beat him with a sweeping brush. Another victim was locked in a cupboard, left in a freezing cold bath and banned from using the toilet. Lamb even tried to scare the victims by playing the music from Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds late at night. The victims were allegedly former partners. Lamb was arrested but failed to turn up for his trial. He was found in Bolton, hiding under the bed of his latest girlfriend, who was pregnant at the time with his child. He denied wrongdoing, claiming a former partner had a vendetta against him. After the hearing, a judge said, "I hadn't got a clue for what was going on, but he truly is a monster. He should be locked away for good." My best friend Nick and I used to work at Wendy's together. We only planned to work there after high school for a few months, but when neither of us ended up going to college, we got complacent, so we worked there for years. We were stuck working full-time, always doing the night shift together. I worked the grill while Nick took orders. The hours were long and brutal, as the Wendy's we worked at was extremely busy. The benefit of working together was that we got to talk about the shift afterwards and bond over the trauma. One of the things we complained about was our boss. For legal purposes, I'll refer to him as his nickname we had for him, Mr. Krabs. Mr. Krabs was a psycho nutcase about saving money and maximizing profits, just like the character in SpongeBob. Something about his business practices admittedly made his Wendy's the most popular one in town, but it came at a high price for the people who worked under him. We never saw anything more than minimum wage without tips, despite how much money we made for Mr. Krabs slaving away in his kitchen. Breaks were pretty much non-existent, let alone paid time off or overtime. If you even mentioned any sort of workers' rights, he would lose it to Mr. Krabs. His employees were just machines to make him money, even screaming in their faces if he ever caught them doing something that might cost him a few cents. But one day, I found out just how far he would go. I was making a few orders on the grill when I heard the distinct sound of Mr. Krabs yelling at someone. The door to Mr. Krabs' office was slightly open, so I walked away from the grill to peek my head in. I remember seeing Mr. Krabs snapping at Nick, screaming in his face. Nick was just sitting there taking it. Suddenly, Mr. Krabs lunged over the desk and grabbed Nick by the neck. I watched in shock as Nick struggled to get free while Mr. Krabs looked like he was going to strangle him. When Nick managed to get out of Mr. Krabs' chokehold, I quickly looked away and went back to the grill. I was stunned. I knew that Mr. Krabs was a psycho, but I never realized up until then just how unhinged he truly was. Later on, Nick told me what had happened. He said it was because he had given a customer a refund. We honestly didn't know what to do. We thought about quitting as we had done many times before, but as always, we were too afraid to be unemployed. We also contemplated on calling the police, but we were genuinely scared of what Mr. Krabs would do afterwards, so we just went back to being complacent. Then, one day, the stars aligned in the worst ways. Wendy's announced that they were planning to launch a SpongeBob Krabby Patty burger to the public. Nick and I knew this was it for us. Every time there was a limited edition menu item, we got slammed. And this time, it was the real-life Mr. Krabs about to be selling Krabby Patties. In the days leading up to the release of the Krabby Patty, we spent our time dreading the horror that was about to surround the building. Mr. Krabs taught me and all the other line cooks how to put together the Krabby Patty. It was surreal. I knew myself, Nick, and the other employees were going to go through hell for the next couple of weeks. And before I knew it, a horde of hungry, impatient, entitled customers descended upon us, cramming into the restaurant like sardines, wrapped around the building and pouring out onto the street. Each and every one of them wanted the same thing, the Krabby Patty. My grill didn't go a moment without being entirely covered in patties. I made more burgers in an hour that day than ever before. The customers were getting angrier and angrier by the minute. I knew there would be no break in sight. Even with the full roster of people working, we were still hopelessly understaffed. And where was Mr. Krabs during all this chaos? Sitting in his office doing nothing to help us. I looked over at Nick and saw that he wasn't doing any better. Despite having worked like a dog all night to take orders, the line to his register was still out the door. People were screaming in his face, blaming him for having to wait so long. I knew he was fighting for his life.
What do you think you're doing? Slacking off in me restaurant? Yes, sorry, sir. Now, get back to work.
Mr. Krabs turned around and started to walk away. After that, the chaos just kept coming. I didn't think I could take much more of it without cracking. Then, I looked over to Nick for the first time in a while, just to see him collapse. He twitched and flailed on the floor with his eyes wide open. I ran to help him, but Mr. Krabs screamed at both of us to get back to work and stop disturbing the customers. I'd finally had it. I ignored Mr. Krabs and called 911. And Mr. Krabs fired us for slacking off. Unfortunately, Nick didn't make it. He died on the way to the hospital. Nick's family is rightfully suing Mr. Krabs for a litany of wrongdoings. Yet as of now, that rotten cheapskate is still running the Wendy's despite what happened. I still can't get over how my friend is gone now, all because of that stupid Krabby Patty.
Back in 2012, I was living in Aurora, Colorado. I had been waiting for The Dark Knight Rises to release since I left the theater after watching Batman Begins. I managed to book a ticket to a midnight screening so I could see it before there was any chance of hearing spoilers. None of my friends were interested enough to stay out late for it, so I was by myself, but the theater was completely sold out. After buying a drink and some popcorn, I got to my seat, which was all the way at the top, right under the projector. While the previews were still playing, I decided to take a piss before the movie started. When I finished my business at the urinal and turned around, I saw a creepy dude dressed as the Joker standing in front of the mirror. I was surprised I hadn't heard him enter the bathroom. It looked like he was doing something with the face paint, but I couldn't tell for sure. I figured he must have been a pretty big fan of the character though, as his outfit and hair dye were pretty accurate. Suddenly, he noticed me staring and turned around, then blew up in my face.
Stop staring at me, dipshit! I'm trying to concentrate, so could you kindly piss off?
Chill out, dude. I was just checking out your costume. You don't have to be such a dick about it.
Despite exploding initially, the guy became oddly quiet. He stared me down with an angry look on his face. It creeped the hell out of me. After a few seconds, I decided washing my hands wasn't worth getting any closer to him, so I left and went back to my seat. The encounter messed with me a bit, but once the movie started, I completely forgot about it. The movie started out amazing. I just remember eating popcorn until this happened.
Whoa, check it out. It's the Joker.
Come on, why the hell do people always have to talk over the movie? What's so important that you... That guy again. I really hope he doesn't sit next to me. Is he really just doing this for attention? How narcissistic do you have to be to distract everyone from the movie just so they'll pay attention to you?
Oh shit, oh shit! No, 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 no! He's got a knife! Run! Move! Go! Get out of the way! Stay away from me! Leave me alone or I'm calling the cops! Ah! No! No! No!
Stare at me? What? Why don't you stare at me while I cut you open and rip your guts out?
You're crazy!
Why couldn't you just die?
I sat there for a while. There wasn't any point in trying to flee with everyone else now that I knew there wasn't a threat anymore. After a minute or so, everyone was gone except for me and the people who were left behind after being attacked. When I finally got up and saw the carnage, I screamed at how many bodies were on the floor. The movie was still playing, but something happened in the chaos that made it glitch out. It was so surreal. I couldn't believe what just happened. The man who attacked the theater was arrested later on. Apparently, when they searched the house, they found it was booby-trapped with explosives, and they had to defuse them all. The media labeled him the real-life Joker, but I think they gave him way too much of the attention he wanted. He was just a sick freak in a costume. I've been dealing with PTSD from that night for years. Anything related to the Joker or the Batman is an immediate trigger. I've gotten better at managing it over time, but I don't think I'll ever be able to watch another Batman movie ever again. It's a shame because I heard the new ones are really good, but it's not worth reliving that nightmare. The story was inspired by a horrific incident regarding a 24-year-old man named James Holmes. On July 20th, 2012, inside a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, during a midnight screening of the film The Dark Knight Rises, dressed in tactical clothing, Holmes set off tear gas and started taking aim into the audience with multiple firearms, taking out a dozen and injuring 70 others. Earlier, he had rigged his apartment with homemade explosives. These were defused by the bomb squad a day after the night of horror. Holmes confessed to the crime, but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Psychology experts at the time told ABC News that while it's hard to know what Holmes' state of mind was before the rampage, details such as him referring to himself as the Joker would suggest that he was a deeply disturbed individual. Holmes was ultimately given 12 life sentences. I want to remain anonymous to avoid losing my job, or risk anybody thinking I have anything against people like the one I'm about to mention. I won't say their names either. I've worked at Wendy's for a long time. I know how to do everything that goes into running a fast food restaurant. I can cook, take orders, and deep clean, all while making sure the next shift is set up for success. I like to think I could hold my own in a fast food joint, but I remember quite clearly when the Krabby Patty was announced. I didn't quite get it at first, but then I realized it was from the show SpongeBob. The whole thing was going viral on the internet. With that in mind, I thought I was prepared. I was, in no uncertain terms, the farthest from prepared for a day at work that I'd ever been. That day was like a trip to hell and back. It felt like we did 10,000 orders in one shift. The number of people I saw in the restaurant that day could have filled a stadium. I spent most of my time at the front of the register or putting out fires. Every single staff member was firing on all cylinders, because they knew if they weren't, there would be a complete breakdown in the dining area. However, despite all the different things that were happening, one face stood out against all the rest. I first saw him about half an hour into my shift. He was a strange-looking guy. A bit cross-eyed, seemed like he didn't or couldn't take care of himself. I figured he was homeless, so when he ordered a Krabby Patty like everyone else, I assumed that would be his big meal for the day. But then, something strange happened. After he got his food, I saw him find a spot to sit in the dining area, which since it was completely packed was just the floor of an empty corner. A little while after he finished his burger, he showed up again. I was surprised to take his order for another Krabby Patty. That was the only thing he said, too. He didn't say hi or smile or say thank you. He just said one thing. "Can I have a Krabby Patty?" I have to admit, there was something sweet about it at first. There was obviously something a little off about it, or maybe he was on something, but he didn't seem to be dangerous or disruptive. All he wanted was the same Krabby Patty everyone else wanted. But then he showed up again and again, always asking for a Krabby Patty, and what was once charming and a little funny gradually became concerning, as I noticed he only lined up for my register, and every time I saw him, he looked more delirious. Finally, I realized these Krabby Patties were like a drug to him. He was hooked, obsessed. When I knew that, it didn't feel so good to take his order anymore, but I couldn't just stop. He was a customer. He must have eaten over 100 Krabby Patties. I had no idea how he came up with that kind of cash, nor could I understand how a single person could possibly eat that much. When it finally came to closing time, he was our last customer in line. By then, he still came up and asked for another Krabby Patty. I unfortunately had to kick him out. I felt bad for him, and guilty that I had to let him get to that point since it seemed like he had legitimate issues with self-control. Regardless, once he was gone, it was time to clean up and finally head home. I lay back on my couch, too exhausted to even turn on the TV. I was about to pass out in my living room with my work uniform still on. Then, at the very edge of sleep, I heard a knock on the window. I ignored it, thinking it was just part of a dream I was about to have. But then I heard it again. I forced myself to get up and check it out. I walked quietly to my door and pulled back the curtains of my front window, and saw the same guy standing outside my house. That's when the guy pressed his hands against the window and said, "Can I have a Krabby Patty?" Then, in a flash, he went ballistic. He started slamming his fist against the glass. "Can I have a Krabby Patty?" I ran away in a panic, grabbing my phone and locking myself in my closet to call the police. While they were on their way, I heard the window shatter. I stayed put, trying to keep quiet while having the police on the other line. As I waited for the police to arrive, all I could hear was faint footsteps climbing up the stairs. All I could do was wait and hope that the guy wasn't going to get me, and thankfully he didn't. The police finally showed up and entered my house to arrest him. Sadly, my fears about him were true. It was found out later that he had some severe mental disorders, and from what investigators could gather, He'd become obsessed with me and used the Krabby Patty in an attempt to get me to like him. I had to file a restraining order, even though he creeped me out and scared the crap out of me. I think that's for the best, as long as he stays away from me.
This happened a few years ago when I used to live alone. My friends would always tell me that it wasn't safe for me to be out by myself so much, especially at night. I lived by myself in a little condo by the park. It was honestly a great location. It was close to my job, and I liked having a park near me. I would usually go on walks in the park after work just to relax a little. There was a nice foresty area that had a pathway, and there were a lot of trees and shade everywhere. It was especially nice during the fall time. However, the park was so nice that it would attract a lot of people. People who weren't even from the area would come to go for walks in the park or have picnics and stuff. People would bring their dogs or their kids, and it made the park packed all the time, which I hated. The last thing I wanted when I went to the park was to be surrounded by a bunch of people. So I recently started walking around nighttime since my building was right across the street. By that time, it would usually be empty as hell. It was perfect. I could go on a whole walk without seeing a single person, until one night. I was walking in the park fairly late, and it was empty as usual. I had been going for several minutes, and there hadn't been anyone else. Then as I was walking, I suddenly saw a tall, thin man standing in the middle of the pathway. He just stood there in one spot, not moving at all. I found it pretty creepy. I had no idea what he could be doing just standing by himself in the park at night. I slowed my steps a bit, just to be cautious, but I kept moving toward him. I didn't really know what else to do. As I continued forward, the guy suddenly turned his head and looked straight at me. I stopped dead in my tracks, totally shook. Then, out of nowhere, the guy charged at me. He grabbed me by my shoulders, smiling with the biggest smile ever. He looked like a cartoon character. I was completely frozen as he continued to grip me by my shoulders and smile at me. It seemed like his smile took up half his face.
Do you want to be my girlfriend? Give me a smile if you do.
I didn't know what else to do, so I nervously gave him a little smile. As soon as I did, he immediately let go of my shoulders and grabbed me by the hand and said,
"You're coming with me then."
He then began to lead me down the pathway. I was still completely shook and in disbelief. I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. I was in total awe as we continued to walk down the pathway through the park.
Where are we going?
We're going to my place. You're my girlfriend now, remember?
I was so confused, but something told me to just go with the flow, so I went with him. It didn't take us long to get to his place from the park. He seemed to live in a building just a few minutes down the street from where I lived. We walked into the building, still holding hands, and got onto the elevator. The next thing I knew, we were in his place. Then we were in his bedroom. His apartment didn't look like I expected. It was actually kind of nice. He told me to get comfortable in his bed. I hesitated for a moment, but then I did what he asked. Somehow, I didn't feel afraid. It felt kind of right. We got intimate after that. Then we fell asleep together. I woke up an hour or two later. It took me a minute to realize where I was, but then I realized that I was sleeping in the man's bed. I drifted back to sleep a few seconds later. Then out of nowhere, the most shocking thing happened. I was jerked awake by the guy jumping on top of me in the bed.
Smile!
I was incredibly startled. I was still shaken by being woken up so abruptly, but I nervously smiled at him. I figured he just wanted more of what he got earlier. He smiled back at me with that same giant cartoonish smile. I smiled wider as I looked up at him. Then something about his face changed. He was still smiling, but it somehow looked different, more crazed. Then the guy suddenly pulled out a pair of pliers and began forcing it into my mouth. That's when he started yanking out my teeth. I didn't even know how I managed to fight my way out, but once I did, I didn't stop running. I eventually made it to the security desk and had the cops called. I didn't see the guy again once I made it out of his apartment. However, he ended up getting arrested a few minutes later. Apparently, It wasn't his first time ripping someone's teeth out. The guy was allegedly a sick freak who had an obsession with women who were gummy. He was immediately taken away and charges were pressed. Ever since that night, I've been traumatized by the smiling man. I'm too scared to go out by myself, or even go out at all. Till this day, I still can't get his smile out of my mind. This story was inspired by a horrific incident regarding a New Zealand man who pulled out his lover's teeth with pliers because he had an obsession for gummy women. 56-year-old Philip Lyle Hansen was sentenced to 6 years in jail. Hansen was found guilty with over several charges relating to the 2 women whose teeth he extracted. His second victim told the court he had targeted her when she was vulnerable, and his actions had mentally damaged her for the rest of her life. She described the pain she felt when he ripped out her tooth, and said she had been deceived when he said he wouldn't do it again. They moved in together and she awoke to find him trying to extract her teeth. Both women were vulnerable. There was breach of trust and a grooming process was involved, the judge said. Hansen's lawyer in his defense said everything was consented, but the offense displayed premeditation, as Hansen must have had the pliers at hand. Hansen's victims cried in the stands as the judge described what took place. During his 7-day trial, Hansen said he liked fat gummy women and wanted to save them money on dental bills.
Steps ahead. 2 steps ahead.
Hi, may I take your order? Or should I say trick or treat?
Yeah, I'll take 20 Big Macs and 5 large Cokes.
Is this for a party or something?
Yeah, it's for the 1 million subscriber Horror Shorts party. Now make my breakfast, dipshit!
It was the fall of 2020 when I just started working at my local McDonald's. I worked there since the summer ended, and everything about the gig was lame, repetitive, and boring. I barely had any time off, and even worked there on weekends because my boss would schedule me a lot. That, or I would often take my coworkers' shifts, just because everyone at the McDonald's used me since I was the new kid on the block. But Halloween was approaching soon, and there was no way in hell I was going to work that day. I intended on giving candy and chilling out that night, so I made sure to book off Halloween in advance. When it was finally Halloween night, I gave out candy to a bunch of kids.
Trick or treat!
There you go. I remember the streets were packed as hell. It seemed like there were a lot more trick-or-treaters out this night than the previous Halloweens. I eventually ran out of candy to give, so I blew out my jack-o'-lantern and turned off my porch lights. Then I went to watch TV in my living room. A few hours went by and then something strange happened. I heard a loud-ass knock on my door. It was a bit alarming as the knock sounded like someone was actually slamming their fists on my door. I got up and went to check the people. That's when I oddly saw my coworker Trevor standing outside my door.
Dude, why the hell are you knocking so loud on my door at 3 in the morning? Dude, are you on that Colombian again?
No, nothing like that, man. I just wanted to tell you the news. Did you hear that the boss is giving out free burgers for Halloween?
What? What are you even talking about?
He said he just needs enough meat to make the burgers.
Dude, I know what you're trying to do.
Just take my shift, damn it! I'm not taking your shift. Today is my day off. Halloween is my day off. I want to Netflix and chill by myself. So get the hell off my property before I call the cops. Please, please, dude, I'm begging you. I'll give you my whole paycheck. Just please take my shift. Fine, I'll be there in a few minutes. God damn it!
Why the hell am I here working alone on Halloween night? This is stupid and ridiculous. I shouldn't have to be here. I should be at home watching horror movies, having a day off, not slaving away at McDonald's like these other idiots.
I need to put my foot down next time.
Hello? Is anybody there?
Yeah, hello, welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?
Trick or treat.
Very funny, sir. May I take your order now?
I said trick or treat.
Dude, Halloween is over. Now I'm gonna ask you one more time. May I please take your order?
One Whopper, please. This isn't Burger King, bitch! Hey, idiot! Go home and Uber Eats! You clearly don't know how to...
What the hell?
No, this can't be happening. Shit!
Oh my god, he's not picking up. What the hell do you want from me?
Trick or treat! 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 I gotta get the hell out of here! What? Trevor, let me out!
Every single Halloween, we must sacrifice someone. We'll take as much job applications as possible. More bodies, more meat, more food, more Big Macs, more business, more tricks and treats. You not only work for me as just a cook, Trevor, you'll also do my dirty work too.
You owe it to me! I spared you! Do as I say! I'm not loving it! I'm not loving it! I'm not loving it! Trevor!
Trick or
This happened to me 10 years ago. I was in high school, celebrating one of my last Halloweens where it still felt appropriate to go trick-or-treating. My friend Alex invited me over to stay the night at his house after we finished for the night. I agreed to it. It was usually fun to be at his house and stay up late away from my parents. That year, Halloween fell on a Friday, so I went the easy way and dressed up as Jason Voorhees. Alex, on the other hand, was a huge fan of Nightmare on Elm Street at the time, so he went as Freddy Krueger. I was impressed by his costume. I hadn't really put any effort into mine, but Alex had gone all out. He got the exact same sweater and hat Freddy Krueger wore, a really realistic looking Freddy Krueger mask, and he was in character every time we went up to someone's house. The centerpiece of his costume, however, was the glove. He made it by hand with real knives, and he wasn't scared to swing it around and show it off. Of course, when any adults asked about it, he said they weren't actually real blades, but I knew the truth. Alex showed me how real those blades were. He stole a jack-o'-lantern, then slashed the face to pieces in front of a bunch of middle schoolers just to screw with them. All in all, trick-or-treating that Halloween went well. We both got respectable loads of candy, but obviously Alex got more. When we got to his house after a few hours, we headed upstairs to his room to get out of our costumes and sort out our candy. Afterwards, we put on a movie. I wanted to play video games, but Alex was obsessed with The Nightmare on Elm Street and forced me to watch it with him. He'd said he'd seen it 12 times and it never got old, but I silently disagreed. Alex eventually turned off all the lights as we were watching it in the dark. About 30 minutes into the movie, when he was sure his parents were asleep, he pulled out a half-full bottle of vodka from under his bed. I was completely caught off guard. I had never had anything to drink except a couple of beers one time, and certainly not anything as strong as vodka. I was a little scared, but Alex was clearly excited about it. He grinned from ear to ear as he put the bottle up to his face, boasting about how he stole it from his parents' liquor cabinet the previous night. I told Alex I wasn't down. After constantly teasing me, I folded. That's when he started fixing us 2 cups mixed with some soda. I really didn't want to participate in the whole drinking thing, but I knew Alex wouldn't let me live it down if I backed down, so I just went along with it. As the movie progressed, I started taking light sips throughout. Alex kept pushing me to chug and drink bigger mouthfuls. The guy was super pushy that night. It seemed like he really wanted me to get wasted this Halloween. I eventually took a large gulp just to get him off my back. It was disgusting. It was way stronger than beer and I hated it. Somehow, Alex was chugging his down. I wondered if he had purposely made my drink stronger than his just to mess with me. As we watched the movie, I only took sparing sips, but after a while, Alex noticed that I hadn't asked for a refill yet. So he got mad and forced me to chug the entire rest of my cup and refill it. I told him to chill out, but he kept yelling in my face and threatened to kick me out, so I did it. Towards the end of the movie, I started feeling extremely under the influence. I don't remember much after that. I just remember passing out. Later on, I woke up sometime later with all the TV and all the lights off. I could barely see, but then I noticed Alex standing in the corner of the room, blocking the door. He was in his Freddy Krueger costume again, taunting me with the blades on his glove. I had no idea how long he'd been watching me sleep. I was terrified of him as if he was the real Freddy Krueger. Alex, is that you? What are you doing? Suddenly, Alex lunged at me. He slashed me across the face before I could put my arms up. I pushed him back and grabbed a pillow because it was the only thing I could find to defend myself. I backed up into the corner and screamed for help as Alex kept trying to attack me.
Help! Help me! Someone get this psycho away from me!
A minute later, Alex's parents barged into the room and apprehended him. I was finally safe. I called my parents to come pick me up. Obviously, they weren't happy when I told them the reason for coming home early. The 6 of us all sat down at the dining table in Alex's house that night, discussing what happened. The cuts I received weren't bad enough for me to need to go to the hospital, but it was still a horrifying sight. His parents begged mine not to call the police, but after everything they heard take place, they did. Alex was arrested in his house, and I was taken home. Alex later confessed that he had laced the cup he made me drink with sedatives. He even admitted that he believed he was Freddy Krueger, and that's why he attacked me. He wanted to give me a real Nightmare on Elm Street death. Obviously, I haven't spoken to Alex in 10 years. What he did was unforgivable, and I still have nightmares about it today. The story was inspired by a horrifying incident regarding a man obsessed with the horror film character Freddy Krueger, who used a homemade bladed glove to slash his sleeping friend. A 37-year-old man named Jason Moore was jailed for life by a judge at the city's Crown Court. According to court records, Moore had watched Nightmare on Elm Street 20 times. He watched it just before the attack. Moore and Mr. Skamarski had been drinking cider together at Moore's home in the early evening, when Mr. Skamarski fell asleep on the sofa. After taking a sleeping pill, the victim, John Paul Skamarski, woke up to find himself being attacked by Moore, slashing him with the glove and a 10-inch bread knife. Moore said he could not remember the attack and said although he had made the glove, he never intended to use it. Police say they were pleased with the conviction in this extremely unusual case. Jailing Moore for a minimum of 4.5 years, Judge Michael Pert said, "You are an extremely dangerous man. You are obsessed in particular with the Freddy Krueger figure in Nightmare on Elm Street. What you were fascinated with was using that glove to take someone out. The person you chose was your friend who was asleep and had no reason to expect an attack." Speaking after the trial, Detective Sergeant Gary said the glove was one of the most frightening weapons he'd ever seen, and that a lot of skill had gone into creating that glove.